company is to tell the story of Columbus's entrepreneurial ecosystem and provide brands with a platform to reach the decision makers of shaping the city's future. So, Elio, welcome to the show.
ST, thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here because I am actually excited to talk to someone who has a big vision of how you can, transform this whole entrepreneurial community in Columbus.
Yeah, man. Transform is a big vision. I think at first what we really want to do is just be able to be a platform where startup founders who otherwise wouldn't get an opportunity to share their story. We just want to be a reliable place, a trustworthy place where they can share that story. And maybe in doing that, we'll get opportunities to do other things, including transform, for lack of a better word, Columbus's nascent startup ecosystem into a global leader for startups. So that's the big vision.
Your big vision is to be able to outshine Silicon Valley, Austin, and the big players out there.
Yeah, well, I don't want to make any enemies. Outshine might seem like we're trying to compete with them. I think we're going to bring our own Midwestern spin to it. We simply just want to be an option for people who otherwise would turn to some of these cities as a first choice, because they may not know that there are other options out there for them, not only for a place to build a business, but also a place to live and raise a family. I think that's where we might have an edge.
Right. And so what do you see in Columbus that, you don't see in other parts of the country?
Well, I haven't lived in many other parts of the country. So I'm an immigrant. I'm originally from Liberia, West Africa. When I immigrated to the States, I was, early teens. And so I wasn't really out in the work world. We lived on the East Coast, so Trenton, New Jersey. So didn't get really much experience about what that ecosystem might be like. Then we moved to Ohio. I also lived in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and Atlanta. But when I was in those two cities, I wasn't involved in the tech ecosystem. So it's not really a real comparison when I'm making these statements, because Columbus is all I know. But what I can tell you from what I do know about Columbus is it's a very open ecosystem. The perfect example is how you and I arrived at this point.
Right.
You attended an event, you introduced yourself during the event, you let me know that you had a podcast, and here we are. That is a perfect example of how things happen in Columbus, where in other cities, at least that I've heard of, some networks might be closed. And you need to know somebody in order to get an introduction. So that is one of the biggest pluses of Columbus, Ohio.
Yeah, so when I came to Columbus, I was like, I've been here since January, and here's it's a different vibe here in the city compared to, let's say, where I came from, which is the Bay Area. And everyone here I feel like everyone here is very relaxed. They're not there to prove themselves to be something grand or something like that. They're here to just, make something of themselves enough to be able to live a great life, I guess.
Yeah, man. And I think that that's a good thing in some ways, because it creates that open network where nobody takes themselves too seriously, although people are serious about the problems that they're trying to solve. But the con to that is that sometimes we hesitate to dream big, right? So one of the things about maybe that you're alluding to about that Silicon Valley attitude is this fact that everybody wants to build something big. And that really is something as an ecosystem we need to adopt, learn from, and adopt to a certain extent, while retaining kind of those Midwestern values of humility and hospitality, etc. I think if we could pull those two things off, will again be an exceptional place to look at for anybody who's wanting to build a company.
And so let me get to your overall background. Like, as you mentioned, you said you're originally from Liberia, and you came here when you were in your teens, and then I just realized you don't sound very Liberian.
Yeah, so I came here when I was in middle school, and middle school can be quite rough. And one of the things, this was before Black Panther, and it was cool to be African. That the teasing and the joking about the accent was an issue. So as a teenager, one of the most important things in your lives is to be accepted by your peer group. Fortunately for me, living in Liberia, English was my primary language. So the language itself wasn't an issue. It was just more of the assimilation, which what you hear is my ability to assimilate, which I could turn it on and off, right? So if I'm talking to my family, I sound completely different. When I'm talking to you or talking to the general public, I sound like this.
You sound like a regular Midwesterner.
Yeah, and a Midwestern accent, if there is such a thing, that's what I think I have.
Right. And so what was the catalyst that got you and your family over here to the US from Liberia?
Very unfortunate circumstances. Liberia, we had a civil war, which started in 1989, continued for 14 years. We were some of the fortunate people able to get out of Liberia before I really had to see any of the worst of the fighting. We left Liberia in 1990, right before the war finally reached the capital city. We went to neighboring Sierra Leone. We were in a couple of border towns, and then we finally settled in the capital city of Freetown. Then my father came to the States and filed for asylum, and he sent for us, and so we relocated to the States, and I've been in the U.S. ever since. Side note, I returned to Liberia after 30 years in March of this year, which was my first trip back, and I have been thoroughly bitten by the bug. I didn't realize how much I missed that place until I went back, and so I want to make that a regular occurrence.
Right. And it's like, I believe 30 years in terms of how things have changed from when you left Liberia versus when you returned back. It's a complete different world, right?
Yeah, but when you leave a place at 9 years old, how much of that do you really remember? Like, how much of your life do you really remember at 9 years old? So I remember some things, but the way I remembered it probably was from the memory of a 9-year-old. The unfortunate thing is that the country really hasn't recovered from the Civil War. In fact, in some ways, it's gotten worse. The infrastructure is, I don't want to badmouth my country on radio, but it is what it is. I mean, if you did some research online right now, that's what you would find. We still have a long, long way to go. However, that's the story of some countries in Africa, which is abundantly blessed with everything that you need to be successful, yet due to many circumstances, varying issues, you're not where you're supposed to be. So you hear this talk of kind of the 21st century being the African century. So we're looking forward to that. We'll see if we can really live up to that expectation.
Well, definitely, considering the fact that Africa is full of resources, and there's people out there, and all they have to do is just make something out of it, and then boom, the continent takes off even higher. But I think there are some good places in Africa right now that are taking off, like Rwanda, Ethiopia, and even Kenya and Morocco.
That's right, but they don't get the coverage that they deserve. So, for example, even though Ethiopia is taken off, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they were involved in a civil war, right?
Right.
I think there's kind of a ceasefire going on in Ethiopia right now. But imagine a war happens, right? And most people don't even know it even happens, because the interconnectivity that we experience when something's going on in Europe or in Asia versus when something's going on in Africa, you really don't see it. Unless it has to do with terrorism or something. You might hear about Boko Haram, but when there's a civil war between two sides in an African country, you very rarely hear it covered in Western media. But yeah, Ethiopia is a great ecosystem. Ghana has a great ecosystem. Nigeria is emerging. Kenya, Rwanda, probably one of the best led countries on the continent of Africa. So yeah, a lot of good news stories, but a lot yet to be done.
Very cool. And so now in the years that follow since you moved here, you've worked across different fields, right? You worked as a consultant, then you worked in sales and marketing, and also worked in business development. What are those experiences like for you?
Well, I cut my teeth primarily in sales. So I'm a sales guy through and through. I love marketing. I love branding, but I know in order to continue to grow and evolve, I need to really get some operations experience. And so our entrepreneurs come in all stripes, right? You got your brand people, your sales people, you have your technicians, right? So an entrepreneur could also be an engineer. You have an entrepreneur that's a true business manager, operator. And so all of those experiences have enriched, particularly on the sales, marketing, and branding side. But now I'm focused on being a good operator, knowing my numbers, strategic planning, executing on that plan, iterating, building systems. That's relatively new to me. I've never really had to focus on that. Even in sales, you have to build systems, you have to have an operating model. But now I'm thinking about the entire business and not just sales.
Like, how do you define being someone good with operating?
So, it's being keenly aware of what's happening in the business at all times. So if you think about an operator is not necessarily focused on any one aspect of the business. They're thinking about HR. Right? When you're a salesperson, maybe you're thinking about, if you're a sales leader, you're thinking about the sales force. As an operator, you're not only thinking about the sales force, you're thinking about everybody else who needs to be hired in order to perform all of the functions of the job. You have to be financial minded. You have to know your numbers. Accounting has to make sense to you. You need to know, your expenses. You need to know how much revenue you have coming in. You need to know your run rate. It's just a different ballgame.
It's like this is like a specialized role for a person who's a jack of all trades.
Yeah, you can say that, but the jack of all trades that knows which trade to deploy at the right time. So you can be very good at a lot of different things, but it also takes a lot of experience to know when to deploy each one of your skills. It's like a great fighter. You got a jab, you got a hook, you got an uppercut. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win the fight. You got to know, when to throw punches, when not to throw punches. You got to think about your opponents as well.
It's primarily like a formation. You're standing up there, getting yourself ready, like just jab a few times to get the feel of the fight. And then when you feel like you see an opportunity to really take down the opponent, you can just hook them. So I think that's kind of what you mean in a way.
Yeah. And it's the thing that nobody talks about. It is the dullest, most boring part of running a business is just sitting there and studying the numbers. It's cool to be Warren Buffett. It's not fun to read 6 hours a day. So it's the difference between the end result, which is, one of the wealthiest people in the world, and then the work you have to do every day, or he has to do every day just to stay where he is. And that's really what an operator is. They are comfortable doing the most mundane, dull things, looking at the financials for the last 2 years to try to figure out what to do in year 3. And so that's the skill and the getting comfortable with being bored that I'm working on.
I've been doing that myself because I work different jobs and it requires me to sustain a level of boredom I never really thought I would ever sustain. Especially when you were younger, you always thought you want to get the flashy job or flashy things. Now, when you get older, only the mundane can help you get through what you need to get, in order to achieve what you need to achieve.
Yeah, it's the same thing with life, man. It's the same thing with raising a kid, having a good marriage, raising a pet, taking care of a house, just anything. Most of it is absolutely boring, right? How many hours are you going to spend vacuuming your apartment? But it's absolutely necessary for keeping a clean home, right? It is that just being okay once a week, you got to vacuum. Right? Otherwise, if you skip a couple of those, your house, your carpet is going to be nasty. It's the same thing with your business. It is that mundane, have that conversation with your accountant. It's that mundane, sit down with your lawyer, review these contracts. All of those things you want to run as far away from as possible are the things that are necessary for you to be successful.
Right. And now let's shift gears with that topic. Let's shift gears towards your current venture, which is 614Startups. And now you've considered this like the fastest growing community of startup founders in venture capitalists and even, let's say, small business owners in the Columbus area. So how did you come up with this whole vision of trying to, bring people together in this sense?
Yeah. So in classic entrepreneurial fashion, I did no research. I was prompted by an idea and I just started. So that's how we started. And we were able to because there was still so much demand in the market for what we were doing. So basically our value proposition was this: if you're a founder, we'll give you a platform. You're building a small business, we'll give you a platform. You're building a business here in Columbus, we'll give you a platform. That was simply it. And what that has evolved into, and what I've kind of been forced to evolve into, is that there's so much demand for that and there's so much attention being paid to 614Startups that I need to quickly pivot into becoming a business, right? And so in the process of becoming a business, I've had to learn these operational skills. And what does that business look like? Go ahead.
I was going to say, how do you really turn this into kind of like a business? Because it feels like when I look at 614Startups, even when I attended the meeting, I felt like it was more of a organization, like a community-based organization. But then how are you able to turn this into kind of like a business, like incubator type?
Yeah. So how do we make this a business? So if you think of your traditional media company, you think of newspapers, right? And newspapers are in the business of getting eyeballs. That's why you have this old adage: if it bleeds, it leads. The news is not necessarily about informing. The news is about keeping you watching. Because here's what the news does. The longer you watch, the more ads they can show you. The news is in the business of making money. Now, I'm sorry to disappoint any of you. If you have your favorite news channel that you trust for your information, all they have done is do a really good job of getting you to keep watching them. And in this very polarized society that we have, you'll find that people actually literally think their news organization is perfect and the other person's news organization is evil. Well, both of them, in between you thinking one is perfect and one is evil, there are ads running that you are watching. If you're on their website, there are ads that you're looking at. So when you ask me, well, how do you turn this thing into the business? We are looking at that very same media model. We are in the business by providing a platform to help founders tell their story. We're attracting the eyeballs of other people who are interested in those stories. And in that, we are able to show them relevant ads for products that could help them be successful. That's essentially how we're transitioning from being a passion project, essentially a community connector like you described, into a full-fledged media company.
Right. And so is this the first real startup organization in the Columbus area that is popping up and making waves right now? Or is there other organizations looking into that?
Yeah, I mean, there are organizations that predate me. Of course, you have your traditional media outlets. So like the Columbus Dispatch, right, which is the biggest newspaper here in Central Ohio. Then you have Columbus Business First, which is the biggest kind of dedicated business first, no pun intended, business only kind of newspaper / online. Then you have Metropreneur. They started way before me, covering local stories of interest, including some business. Then you have other podcasts, right? There are a ton of them. The Columbus Chamber has C-Buzz that also does interviews with business leaders. And one of the oh my gosh, don't let me forget, Conquering Columbus, right? One of the OGs in the game. They've been doing the podcasting game for a long time. Much respect for those guys. They've been grinding. So we're not the only game in town. And it's like any other business, you're going to have competitors. But I think the thing that we've done really, really well is not only do that media coverage, but also build that community. And a lot of people online will tell you, hey, if you want to build a business now in the digital age, it's not just about engaging with people on the surface. You really have to get to know them. So we take the time to get to know our audience.
Right. And so what are the types of activities that 614 Startups is taking that is trying to really distinguish itself from its competition?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we're playing in 3 different games. Now, a lot of people do the same thing. So take somebody like Columbus Business First. The only thing that I would say that we maybe are doing differently than them is a real focus on podcasting. But of course, they have the media arm. They're much larger organizations than we are, and they do their events. There are 3 core things that we do, and we want to be the number one for podcasting. We want to eventually start to create original written content, and we want to be the number one for events. I think in those 3 areas we can really compete, but that's where I think we really add value. So those are our 3 core services: the podcast, we want to do more writing, and we want to do more events.
Right. And so what are the types of ventures that come into 614 Startups that you feel like they have a good potential of making an impact in the Columbus area?
Oh man, if I could pick who's up next and I had money, imagine how wealthy I would be. But even the people who do this professionally have a hard time picking who's gonna do well. I have probably missed out on so many great companies, and I had a gut feeling about some of them, but I can't say, it's one thing to say, oh, I would invest if I had money. It's another thing to have the money to invest and actually pull the trigger. But the startups that I found in Columbus that do really well are insurance startups.
Of course, because things are true. Like Columbus is one of the few insurance capitals of the world, or the United States that way.
That's right. So we specialize in launching insurance companies. So you got Root Insurance, you have Bold Penguin, which I think I had acquired for close to $1 billion. Who else? You have Branch Insurance that raised some kind of outrageous round recently, close to a $1 billion valuation. Everybody can fact check me on this stuff. I'm not an encyclopedia, but that's just an example of some of the companies that do well. So some of the up and coming insurance companies that I've heard of in the ecosystem would be like a Battle Phase. Right. I think they do travel insurance. and then my man Sam Badu, who's building a company called Flurry, where they're taking remittance from the diaspora. So a lot of times people in Africans living in America, their family member might need some money, and we send it for a wide variety of reasons. But one of the things that is lacking in Africa, or one of the biggest opportunities in Africa, is to build a health insurance market. And he's in the process of building Flurry, which takes the remittance intended for healthcare and it's turning that remittance into insurance premiums in order for family members in Africa to access healthcare. So it's the classic chicken or the egg. Do we need an insurance market to spur innovation in healthcare in Africa, or do we need healthcare access to spur insurance? Sam, in his case, has said, I think if we lead with an insurance marketplace, the entrepreneurs will emerge to build the healthcare systems necessary because they know they're going to get paid through this insurance plan. So Flurry is top of my list in terms of insurance companies that have a lot of potential going forward.
And I believe because Columbus is home to Nationwide Insurance, and is that like is that one of the reasons why insurance in the area is going high? Is it everywhere you go? It's like there's a lot of insurance related companies popping up here and there, and because a lot of people here, I realize that in Columbus they either work in insurance or they work in healthcare.
Yeah, we have a bunch of insurance companies here. So Nationwide being the biggest, I believe. Another company which launched in the 90s for high-risk drivers was Safe Auto, and they're massive now. You got Grange that's here. You have State Auto, I believe. So there are a ton of these larger legacy companies, and out of those companies, and the great thing about working in an industry and understanding it is you see inefficiencies, right? So let's say somebody working at Nationwide, and that person is a claims adjuster. Big shout out to Nationwide. Nationwide is a sponsor of 614 Startups, so let's step Nationwide aside for a bit.
Sorry, my other gig is basically helping out Nationwide with their IT systems, so you're not alone.
Right. So let's say insurance company X. You work for insurance company X, and you notice that there's an inefficiency in their claims adjustment process. Right there is a potential start. Now, if you're in Columbus and you notice that there's a claims adjustment problem within company X, 9 times out of 10, right across the street, company Y has the same problem. So right there, you have potentially 2 Fortune 500 clients for your product. So let's say you build that product and you go to an investor like Rev. Say, Rev 1, I want to disrupt the insurance industry. I understand it like the back of my hand. In fact, this problem is so prevalent. We have 5 clients, large clients with money who need to solve this problem. We feel like it's $1 billion problem across the industry. Rev 1 is more likely to give you an opportunity. Now you're part of their startup studio. You go back to your job, you go back to the other 2 or 3 companies, say, hey, I have this demo out, would love to get you on this demo, see if it helps you solve a problem. Because it's such an acute problem, you have 5 potentially Fortune 500, or at least Russell 1000 companies all in your neighborhood now using your product. That's why being in a neighborhood like this with all of these insurance companies and then working in insurance and seeing some of the problems is really a hotbed for starting a disruptive company in the insurance industry.
Right, because you just gave a full-on summary on how to start a company in general, because all you got to do is find the problem and then find what those companies are having problems. So you just set up your own startup, you ask for funding from an investment firm, and then boom, you're basically good to go now that they've seen the fact that you got 2 major Fortune 500 clients that are in need of this product to get their systems running smoothly. So it's kind of...
And you live in a city where they're going to give you a shot, like actually take a meeting from you. Can you imagine? Okay, let's say you're in New York or something. Hey, big shout out to New York. I love everywhere. I'm just using big city, right? So you're in big city and you have the equivalent, but maybe you have like 20 times as many insurance firms. To get a meeting with the decision maker in a city of 11 million people is much different than trying to get a meeting with the decision maker in a city of like 1 million and change, right? Or a metropolitan area of 1 million and change. That is what I mean by the proximity that you have to decision makers. And there's really not that much difference in terms of the scale of a lot of these companies, like a Nationwide or something like that.
So how vibrant is the entrepreneurial scene here in Ohio, particularly Columbus?
Well, vibrant. I mean, are people as engaged in terms of let's say we throw an event? Do we get the kind of attendance that we'd like to see? I think we could get bigger attendance. I think there are way more people who are in the startup ecosystem here that really haven't adopted the mindset that your network is your net worth. I think that's an area where we fall behind. I was terrible at this. Okay. But then I have like an adopted big brother. He knows who he is. He's been helping me really understand the importance of networking, right? Not only for people who you're going to do business with or people who you interview, but just people in the community that you should know. One of the things that we failed, that I've noticed, is that when opportunities to network arise, fewer than optimal number of people are taking advantage of that. So when you talk about vibrancy, that's where I see we have the biggest opportunity to be more vibrant. In terms of startup starts, I think we're falling way behind on that. I think we need to be starting more companies. We need more risk taking. And then of course, venture capital. We need to attract more local VCs to the ecosystem.
So how is 614 Startups looking to achieve that in the coming years?
Yeah, man. So, crawl before you walk, right? So if you think about trying to do all of that, it really takes you off of your own mission as a company. I forget what article I read this in, but it was like, is a startup founder's responsibility to build a successful company or build a successful community? I think primarily I need to make sure that 614 Startups is successful. And with that success, we will eventually address some of these problems. So should I make it a priority to encourage more companies to start? Like, how do we get the risk-taking machine going? Or is it better for me to build a $500 million company that gets acquired by, let's say, Viacom, creating, I've become a millionaire, and then, early employees all become millionaires? Or do I focus my energy on trying to encourage, build an incubator or something and help people launch companies? I don't know, but I think scaling my company and getting acquired for $500 million will do a lot more. And so that's my primary focus. On the periphery are some of those other things, but I really think the more successful founders we have and the more interconnected we become, the better we'll be.
And what about the future of Columbus?
It's bright. We're over the next 10 years, we're projected to double in size. Our government officials and our leaders are keenly aware of this. And so what I like about the leadership that we have as a city is that they're not on the back foot. We're spending the money in terms of infrastructure. We're thinking about how do we build housing to accommodate our growth? And then how do we build equitable communities and upward mobility for as much of the community as possible? I would hate to live in a city where most of the gains over the next 10 years accrue to just a very few, into a very few hands. And so from a governmental point of view, I think we're doing all of the right things. From an ecosystem point of view, again, some of the things that I pointed out, more risk-taking, more success, pushing, thinking big, trying to scale your company, try to be as successful as you can be, and then working with investors, trying to attract investors to the ecosystem. But with all of that said, I think Columbus's future is bright. We're for the first time, I think, in mass, seeing a lot of founders who have led other companies to exits, starting company number 2. So folks like Matt Scantlin, would be one. He started Cover My Meds, had the exit, and now he's on to building And Health. We had Nick Poss, who was part of scaling up Script Dropped and is now building Gift Health, which I think just sold a minority stake in that company for $40 million. There are going to be a lot of new millionaires that come out of Gift Health that are going to go on to build companies. So I love the second generation where these founders are going on to company number 2, and then those employees that were part of that original company are now starting their own company. So it's an exciting time in the ecosystem. I can't wait.
Very cool. So yeah, I think we're out of time on the podcast. So I just want to thank you again, Elio, for taking the time to speak and be able to discuss your venture and about Columbus in general. And looking forward to seeing how this whole ecosystem will evolve.
Yeah, ST, you're the man. I'm usually the guy asking questions. I appreciate you taking the time to hear what I have to say. And all the best.
No problem.